Hi everyone, my name is Dean Gamble. I'm the technical manager of the Energy Star Single Family New Homes program. In today's short webinar, we'll discuss the newly proposed California program requirements, Single Family New Homes version 3.5, and Multifamily New Construction version 1.5. Let me quickly run through our agenda and then we'll jump right in. We want to start with the current Energy Star program requirements in California. Next, I'll discuss the Single Family New Homes program, including key updates to the California Code and the proposed next version of the program requirements in California. After that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca Hudson to cover the equivalent topics for the Multifamily New Construction program. Finally, she'll provide a quick overview of our stakeholder feedback period, and we'll end with Q&A. So let's start with the current program requirements in California as some level setting. So these are referred to as the Single Family New Homes California Program Requirements version 3.4 and the Multifamily New Construction California Program Requirements version 1.4. As the name implies, these requirements have been tailored for California, but they're not entirely different from our national program requirements. For both the Single Family New Homes and Multifamily New Construction program, there are two key components, a performance target and mandatory features. There are two options for meeting the performance target today. The first is an efficiency EDR of at least 5 points, better than that of the standard design corresponding to the home, and that's using the 2022 Building Energy Efficiency Standards of the state. The second option is a compliance total with savings of at least 10% above the 2022 standards. Note that for the multifamily new construction program, the second option is the only one that's applicable. Now, these targets are unique to California. In contrast, the mandatory features are the national program checklists. In other words, the exact same checklists being used in the rest of the country. For context, California's participation in the Energy Star program over the last year broke down as follows. By sector, over 90% of certifications were single family as opposed to multifamily. And by location, over 80% of certifications occurred in just 4 climate zones, California climate zones 10 through 13. If we expand that to 7 climate zones, so 9 through 15, then more than 90% of certifications occurred in these locations. And that means that less than 10% of certifications occurred in the remaining 9 climate zones. That would be climate zones 1 through 8 along the coast, as well as climate zone 16, the most inland climate zone. So in short, we have a high concentration of single family homes being certified in climate zone 10 through 13. So that's where we stand today. Let me cover what we're proposing to change for the single family new homes program first. And then, like I said, I'll turn it over to Rebecca to discuss the multifamily new construction program. The current California program requirements were developed in response to the 2022 edition of code. And since that time, California has updated its code to the 2025 edition, which is what these proposals we're talking about today are in response to. So let's discuss some of those details. California just completed its latest code last month, the 2025 edition of the Building Energy Efficiency Standards, after a multi-year process. This new edition has an implementation date of January 1st, 2026, so that's still a little ways off. For today's presentation, I just want to highlight the key code updates in this edition that are relevant to our program. So first off, this code continues its progression towards electrification in the state. The standard design against which homes are benchmarked is always configured with a heat pump space conditioning system with minimum federal efficiency. And it's also configured with a heat pump water heater with minimum federal efficiency. However, within the single family standard design, the core efficiency requirements are identical to the last edition, except for a modest improvement to the windows, which is shown here in green. So it's important to point out here that all the other efficiency features that kind of comprise that standard design are the same as the last code. In addition, the performance metrics are being rebranded. The old metric was referred to as the Energy Design Rating, or EDR, and there were a few different flavors of that. EDR 1 was based on the total annual source energy. In the 2025 edition of code, this has been rebranded as the Source Energy Budget. It's determined by applying the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of the standard design to the proposed design building, and then the source energy is the total annual source energy. EDR2 was based on time-dependent valuation, or TDV, energy with two different components. There is an efficiency component that we cared about, and a component to account for solar electric generation and demand flexibility for things like batteries. These two components summed to the total EDR2 value. Now with the 2025 edition, this has been rebranded as the long-term system cost, or LSC. Like the EDR, it's determined by applying the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of the standard design to the proposed design building, and there are still two components to it. There's an efficiency LSC, which encompasses energy for space conditioning, water heating, mechanical ventilation, and a self-utilization credit. And there's the total LSC, which is the efficiency LSC plus energy from the PV system, battery storage, lighting, demand flexibility, and other plug loads. The key component we care about again is that efficiency LSC bucket. So that brings us to the proposed next version of the Energy Star single-family new homes program requirements in California. Just as we respond to the release of new model codes at the national level, we need to define and implement new Energy Star versions for California in response to the latest state standards, in this case, the 2025 edition. Now, given the limited changes to the efficiency components of that standard, which we just discussed, the proposed performance targets will remain the same in this new version, meaning that we want to maintain a savings target of at least 10% for consistency with the national brand promise. However, to align with the latest edition of code, we want to update all of the code references from the 2022 to the 2025 edition of code, and we want to update the names of the performance metrics to align with the 2025 edition as well, so from EDR to LSC. As a result, here's the proposed new version for single-family new homes, California version 3.5. It should look very similar to the prior version. For the performance target, there will continue to be two options, either an efficiency LSC that's at least 5 points better than that of the standard design, corresponding to the home using these new 2025 building energy efficiency standards, or an efficiency LSC compliance margin that's at least 10% better than the 2025 standards. The mandatory features will remain the same, meaning the national program checklists, with the exception that we're proposing to advance what we call the infiltration backstop. And I'd like to discuss that a little bit more now. So as I mentioned, California will continue to use the national program checklists. Separate from this new version that we're discussing today, the EPA is proposing to add what we call an infiltration backstop to all of its program requirements in the next annual revision. By infiltration backstop, I mean a maximum air leakage rate that a home must not exceed in order to be certified. For the proposed California program requirements, this backstop would advance. So, separate from what we're discussing today, we're separately proposing adding an infiltration backstop of 4.5 ACH50 for California version 3.2 and version 3.3. So those are existing versions of the program in the state. And separately, we're proposing a more stringent backstop of 4.0 ACH50 for California version 3.4, which is the current most stringent version in the state. With this new version that we're discussing today, we're proposing to advance that infiltration backstop again to 3.5 ACH50. That means that every home certified to this new version would have to have an infiltration rate that's not above this limit. The only exception would be for dwellings that are equal to or smaller than 1,500 square feet, townhouses of any size, and attached dwelling units of any size. For those property types, the limit would be based on a different metric. It would be 0.3 CFM50 per square foot of dwelling unit enclosure area. That's essentially a less stringent alternative metric that recognizes that it can be more difficult at times to tightly seal structures of these types. We think this is an important advance for the program on top of our existing mandatory air sealing requirements because reduced infiltration improves efficiency, comfort, and indoor air quality. So let me wrap this up for the single-family new homes program. Overall, I think you'll find the stringency of the current and the newly proposed version of the Energy Star program requirements for California should be roughly comparable because the efficiency itself in code has largely plateaued. The most notable change is the advancing infiltration backstop. Now, our expectation is that compliance with this new version will be able to be demonstrated using standard California code compliance reports, just like the current versions. And the proposed implementation date for this new version would be homes permitted on or after January 1st of 2027 that are also required by the authority having jurisdiction to use the 2025 edition of code. So that's a little bit of a ways off, and it's also only going to be applicable to homes that fall under this new edition of code. So for example, if a home is permitted prior to January 1st of 2027, or if the authority having jurisdiction allows the use of a prior edition of code, then this latest version would not apply. Okay, let me pause there and turn it over to Rebecca to take on the multifamily new construction program.
Great, thanks, Dean. So we're going to get started on multifamily new construction. Just like for single family, let's take a look at what has changed for multifamily in the 2025 code. As Dean noted, the code continues its progression towards electrification, and this is for multifamily as well. So heat pump and heat pump water heater readiness is mandatory for gas or propane heaters are installed, and for low-rise buildings, the standard design, against which buildings are benchmarked, is always configured with a heat pump water heater with minimum federal efficiency. Okay, but also within the standard design, the core efficiency requirements are very similar to the last edition, again, similar to single family, with some consolidation across low-rise and high-rise in terms of the envelope measures as well as the standard design calculation. Also, just like with single family, the performance metrics have been rebranded. So the old metric was referred to as the energy budget for the standard design building. It is determined by applying the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of the standard design to the proposed design building and is expressed in TDV energy. With the 2025 edition, this is rebranded as the long-term system cost, or LSC, just like for single family. Like the energy budget, it's determined by applying the mandatory and prescriptive requirements of the standard design to the proposed design building. There are two components, an efficiency LSC, which encompasses energy for space conditioning, water heating, mechanical ventilation, and a self-utilization credit, just like for a single family, and the total LSC, which is the efficiency LSC plus energy from the PV system, battery storage, lighting, demand flexibility, and other plug loads. So just like for single family, the key component that we care about is the efficiency LSC. So that brings us to the proposed next version for the multifamily new construction program requirements in California. As you noted in the single family side, we also need to maintain the 10% savings over code. And so for multifamily, here's the resulting proposed new version, multifamily new construction California version 1.5, which is also very similar to the prior version. For the performance target, there will continue to be a 10% efficiency savings based on whole building modeling, but it will be an efficiency LSC compliance margin that's at least 10% better than the 2025 standards. And the mandatory features will remain the same. The national program checklist using the ASHRAE path where applicable. But unlike for single family, we're not proposing any adjustments to the multifamily new construction compartmentalization metric based on the version. So that's pretty much the overview for the multifamily program. Just like with single family, the stringency of the current and new version of the Energy Star program requirements for California should be roughly comparable. Our expectation is that compliance with this new version will be able to be demonstrated using the standard California Code compliance reports, just like the current version, and the proposed implementation date for this new version would be buildings permitted on or after January 1st, 2028 that are required by the authority having jurisdiction to use the 2025 edition of the code. So note that that is 1 year later than the date for single family. So if a building is permitted prior to January 1st, 2028, or if the authority having jurisdiction allows the use of a prior edition of code, then this latest version would not apply. Okay, to wrap up our webinar today, I just want to summarize the proposals and explain how the stakeholder feedback period will work. Our proposal today for the single family new homes and multifamily new construction programs is a response to the recently completed 2025 edition of code in California. We're proposing to maintain the same performance targets as the prior version in the state, but with updated code references and performance metrics named to align with the 2025 edition. For just the single family new homes program, we're proposing a more stringent infiltration backstop of 3.5 ACH50 with alternative metrics for small homes and attached homes. And finally, the proposed implementation dates are for single family new homes, permits on or after January 1st, 2027 for homes required to use the 2025 edition of code, and for multifamily new construction, permits on or after January 1st, 2028 for buildings required to use the 2025 edition of code. Before finalizing these proposals, we're holding a 4-week stakeholder feedback period. It kicks off today, October 10th, and runs through November 7th. You can visit the link shown here to view the draft program requirements, a copy of this webinar, and the stakeholder feedback form. Using that feedback form, you can submit comments to Energy Star Homes at energystar.gov. Barring any substantial partner feedback, we're aiming to release the final program requirements in December. And with that, I think we can turn it over to see if there are any questions.
All right, so we have a quiet group today, and we do not currently have any questions that have been sent in. So I think I would like to just thank Dean and Rebecca for the presentation today, unless any questions come in the next few seconds.
Michael, while people are thinking that over, I'll just note that we recorded the webinar and we'll post a copy of that on the stakeholder feedback page. So people need to digest this further, see it again. They'll be up there shortly for them to take a look at. We'll send a partner email out later today announcing the posting of that stakeholder feedback page.
Great. And we have had a few people chat in that they're typing in questions. So let me just wait for those to come in. All right, so we do have one question about what the implementation timeline would be for the new blower door requirement. Could you go over that?
Sure, and is that the one, let's see, is that referencing the older versions of the Energy Star program?
Yes, for older versions, yes.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. So that proposal that's separate from this particular proposal for California, that would be applicable to homes that are permitted on or after January 1st of 2026. So that's still over a year off. We had a public comment period on that proposal over the summer. We got lots of feedback on that, and other proposals we're planning to make to the next revision called Revision 14. So the plan right now is we're aiming to release the final Revision 14 later this calendar year, and then there'll be a full year transition before that would go into effect. So just to reiterate the main point, that would go into effect for older versions for homes permitted on or after January 1st, 2026.
Great, thanks, Dean. And you mentioned that Title 24 software could be used to show compliance with Energy Star requirements, at least the performance target. Could you expand on how that's done?
Yeah, and we can probably release some training around this once the software is updated. Right now, there are some developmental builds of that compliant software, but not final approved versions because the code itself was just finished last month. But under the current versions, when you're running a compliance report, you'll see the compliance margins already calculated. So you're just evaluating a building or a home for code compliance. It'll say you're meeting code or you're exceeding code by 5% compliance margin, for example. So we're expecting very similar reports to be available in the next edition that would show you the compliance margin that you're at, either below code, or in the case of Energy Star, you have to be at least 10% over the compliance margin for certification. Alternatively, there are reports showing, under the current versions, the EDR score that you're achieving versus the EDR of the standard design. And so it's a pretty basic, it includes actually the difference between those as well. So we'll say you're 2 points better on the EDR scale than the standard design. We expect that to translate over to this new LSC model as well. So it wouldn't address, and Michael, you kind of alluded to this, it wouldn't address things like the mandatory checklist items, but it would be showing you if you're meeting the performance targets required by the state.
Great, thanks, Dean. We had one question about there's a California HERS provider that went out of business and how that impacts certification with through Energy Star.
Well, you're required to work under a provider or under the construct the HCO has devised, and typically that's under a provider model in California. You'd have to work with a different provider going forward. It might be best to take that offline if there's some specific questions about like the transfer of jobs that are in flux at the moment. But generally speaking, you have to continue working under a provider that's active in order to certify homes.
Great, thank you. And then we have one that's more, I think, more multifamily focused. The partner's asking about pathways that don't require rigid exterior insulation. So Rebecca, maybe you could talk about the current requirements for multifamily for reduced thermal bridging, and maybe touch on the proposals for the next revision that went out as well.
Sure, yeah, so as noted, we do require for non-wood frame buildings to have rigid insulation on the exterior. So that is not proposed to change for any of the proposals that went out this summer. However, some of our other thermal bridging requirements do have proposed adjustments, in particular regarding the advanced framing requirements for wood frame buildings and that option. So if they're talking about wood framed multifamily, then we do have a proposal out for adjustments to advanced framing in terms of assessing the advanced framing and having that be an assessment checklist item as opposed to a mandatory requirement. But I also just wanted to note that the proposal did not cover any changes to that requirement for non-wood framed buildings. But we do appreciate the feedback.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. We do have a partner asking about HVAC equipment sizing requirements and asking if there will be any update for those to account for heat pumps without, I believe, without backup electric resistance heat.
Yeah, one partner has flagged this issue for us already within the code. I think our cursory understanding of the 2025 edition of the California code is that compressors will be required to be sized to meet 100% of the heating load, so not reliant on electric resistance backup heat, for example. Separate from the code requirements, Energy Star has certain sizing limits that have to be met. They're a bit more generous than older versions of ACCA Manual S, but don't necessarily allow the compressor to be sized to meet 100% of the heating load if that results in gross oversizing of the compressor relative to the cooling load. In 2025, we're planning to revisit those sizing limits in the Energy Star program, in part because ACCA has released a new edition of ACCA Manual S that is more generous in terms of sizing compressors to the heating load, as long as you're controlling for latent loads. In other words, as long as you're managing your moisture sufficiently, you're not going to have high humidity levels. So it's a great issue that's being raised. It's kind of on our to-do list for 2025 to think more carefully about how we might be evolving our requirements in the Energy Star program in that area. So more to come.
All right, thanks, Dean. So we have one more question. I don't know if you're going to have any information on this, but the partner's asking if you expect USGBC with lead for homes in mid-rise to adopt any of these requirements or standards, or if you think they'll be different. I'm not sure if you'll have any information on that, but any thoughts?
I don't, at least for lead for homes. Apologies. Rebecca, I don't know if you have any insights on the mid-rise or high-rise
I
requirements.
don't, unfortunately, on that either for mid-rise.
Yeah, I think they're probably hearing about this for the first time if they're sitting on this webinar as well. So it's all happening pretty rapidly, given that the code itself was just finalized last month. And we have quite a ways to go before they're actually, these new proposals will be implemented. So I'd suggest reaching out to USGBC if you'd like to learn more about that.
All right, thank you both. Another question about another semi-related program related to the DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes program. So their current requirements are a little bit more stringent than Energy Star in terms of EDR and savings targets through a compliance margin, and asking if there's any updates, whether the DOE programs will line up with these as well.
I can't speak on their behalf. I expect they'll be considering whether to advance the program version, in response to the 2025 edition of code as well. Given, again, I think, the key takeaway for us, and perhaps it will be for them as well, is that the efficiency requirements of the code itself is generally plateaued. So 10% above, or 5 EDR points is going to be roughly as efficient as under the new version as the prior version. So perhaps they'll extend the same performance targets going forward to the next version as well. But I don't want to speak on their behalf. We'll have to wait and see what they propose.
All right, thank you. So great questions. And right now, I think that is all the questions that have come in. I wrote back to some of you to say there are some things that are a little too specific, so you could email us directly. But I think that's all the questions we have for now. So thank you, Dean and Rebecca, for the presentation today.
Thank you again to everyone who attended today's webinar. As a reminder, a copy of the slides will be sent out shortly to all registrants from today's webinar, along with a link where you'll be able to watch a recording of the presentation. If you do have any additional questions on any content from today's presentation or on the stakeholder feedback period, please feel free to email us at energystarhomes@energystar.gov. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.